So this is the first video going through our half-term holiday work on B4, Inheritance, Variation and Evolution. Question 1 here is a photograph of a root of an onion plant. And the question A is, cells X and Y have just been produced by cell division. Name the type of cell division that produced cells X and Y. Well, there's two types of cell division. There's meiosis and mitosis. And meiosis produces gametes, 4 genetically varied daughter cells, and mitosis produces 2 genetically identical cells. And because gametes in plants are pollen and eggs, and in humans are sperm and eggs, it can't be meiosis because we're making root hair cells here. And so the first type of cell division is mitosis. Okay, and that is the straight fact. Anything that's not making sperm and eggs in animals or pollen and eggs in plants is going to be mitosis. Okay. What happens to the genetic material before the cell divides? Well, we've got a situation in mitosis where we've got one cell turning into 2 genetically identical cells. And if they're genetically identicals, both cells must have the same amount of DNA. So if we had one strand of DNA in there, in order for it to produce 2 cells with one strand in, we would need to double the DNA first. And you can see on the right hand side here, the DNA, what happens to the genetic material? It replicates, doubles, is copied. Okay. A gardener wanted to produce a new variety of onion. Explain why sexual reproduction could produce a new variety of onion. Well, the first thing to say here is that sexual reproduction is the fusion of gametes. Okay, that is the definition of sexual reproduction. And so in animals, that would be sperm and egg, and in plants, that would be pollen and the egg. Now, why does this produce variation? Well, sperm and eggs are produced by meiosis, and they both have 23 chromosomes in humans, for example. Okay, it doesn't really matter how much this would be in a new variety of onion. But just going to the human example, if you've got 23 chromosomes, that's half the genetic material. So in meiosis, you get a division twice, and these 4 will have half the number of chromosomes of this top one. Okay, and they will be genetically varied. So we're talking about the fusion of gametes here to get variation. So one, meiosis forms genetically different daughter cells. Okay, and which would produce the pollen and the ova or eggs. 3, fertilization, bringing these 2 together, will fuse 2 genetically varied cells with half the genetic information. And if I just get rid of these. Okay, so we've got meiosis forming genetically different daughter cells. In a plant, that would be pollen and ova. The fertilization of those is a fusion of 2 genetically varied cells with half the genetic information. And so 4, you'd get half the genetic information from one parent, half the other, which goes to a new genetic combination. Okay, So that is the process. We're talking about meiosis, forming gametes which are genetically varied. The fusion of those gametes is called fertilization. And because we've got two genetically varied gametes, they're going to produce a whole new type of onion. Okay. If we look at the mark scheme on the right-hand side here, we can see that it says fertilization. Let's see, fertilization occurs. They've actually done it in an order I wouldn't necessarily do it in, but fertilization occurs. So you can see the fusion of gametes leading to a mixing with genetic information. One copy from each parent, or gametes produced by meiosis, or meiosis causes variation. Okay, so by going through the whole process there, we've definitely hit all of the marks. Okay, let's move on. Question 2. So, the drawing shows some of the fossils found in the layers of rock in two cliffs. The two cliffs are on opposite sides of a large valley. Geologists think that the valley had been carved out by rivers and that the order of rock layers has not changed. Which of the rock layers, A, B, C or D, is the oldest? So, I hope we all know that the further something is down, the longer ago that it was on the Earth, and there's been a laying down of sediment ever since, year on year on year, and so the oldest layer is D. Give the letters of two rock layers on opposite sides of the valley that are the same age. Well, there's a really obvious one here. You can see that the mollusk shells here are level with the mollusk shells here, and so D and Y would be an obvious one. You can see on the mark scheme on the right hand side it says or C and X or B and W. The reason that C and X would be right is that they are one layer above D and one layer above Y, so they must be the same. And the reason why B and W must be is that we've got this layer here, which is the same, and B and W therefore are the same. Okay, so you do have options there, but the most obvious one is the one where the mollusk shells are found. How do fossils provide evidence for the theory of evolution? So what we want to be talking about here is evidence-based. So we know that evolution is the gradual change of organisms to adapt to their environment, and to create new species would create species which can no longer, or to create species which can mate and have fertile offspring. So we believe that evolution over time has happened, and older organisms have evolved into newer ones that are adapted to a changing environment. So that's what evolution is. Now, if that was true, and you have Z here, evidence of evolution would be to be able to see the changes that had occurred back in X and Y. So, for example, you remember I did you the video of the whale. If you've got a whale here, if you believed that it evolved from a dog-like creature on the shore and then went to a number of different species in between, which were a bit like swimming dogs and then more like dolphins and then eventually whales, so they would be, one of those would be Y. Evidence of evolution would be that you could see the fossils of Y and of the original dog. I think it was Placicetus or something. Anyway, so the fossils give evidence of previous species that have existed, which would be in the chain. Okay, and the other thing about it is it gives a time stamp as well. So if at the beginning of this question, for example, we can see the layers here. Because each layer is at a different time, you can actually see a chronological order of those fossils. So the evidence that fossils supply is species you can be seen which are no longer alive, and so they offer a sequence of evolution to get from one species to another via evolution. And the other thing is they're buried in a chronological order so they can give timescales. Okay, the mark scheme here, and they've underlined providing evidence on the right hand side here. Let me just make this a bit bigger. So you can see here on the right hand side, MB, answers must relate to fossils providing evidence. Okay, so this is a really good steer from the board, because what this type of question could come up for you, and you would need to be able to make sure that whenever you're talking about fossils and evidence for evolution, you're talking about evidence, okay? Because this will be the same in the future. The mark scheme will be requiring evidence. So you can see here, they say it shows types of animals or plants that no longer exist, underlined. Named reference, e.g. a dinosaur. And they show changes in the types of animals, okay? Similar fossils found in rocks of a similar age, and reference to a sequence of change. With an example, horse limb, or any two for one mark. Now, I'm actually going to spend a bit more time on this because I think this is where our mark scheme is fantastic. Okay, so I have described, I'm going to rub this out. I have described the process of why fossils give evidence. And in my description, I would have got all the marks. But I want us to look here at this mark scheme and really learn from it for any future questions based upon what the mark scheme says rather than my description. Okay, so the first thing is, one, we need to talk about evidence. Okay, you've got to get evidence into your answer. Okay, and two, you've got to, anything underlined in mark scheme is a must. You've got to say that it shows evidence of animals or plants that no longer exist. Okay. Three, that the fossils show evidence of change. And four, the layers of rock of a similar age excuse me, show a sequence of events or a chronology. Now, excuse me, this is really, really good because this actually is the answer for any evidence of fossils question that you're going to get, anyone's going to get. And the board have laid out their exact wording for what you need to write for fossils being evidence of evolution. The fossils show evidence of animals and plants that no longer exist. The fossils show evidence of change, and they have layers of rock of a similar age, which means that each layer of rock going up would show a chronology, and so you can see the change in organisms over time by seeing those animals buried that no longer exist. Okay? That's a really, really nice way that the board in this mark scheme have told us exactly what you need to write in this topic. Okay? So, question 3. Doctors give antibiotics to patients to kill bacteria in their bodies. Explain how the overuse of antibiotics has led to the evolution of antibiotic resistance. So, of bacteria. So we've got 3 marks here. And in this, it says to gain 4 marks in this question, you should write your ideas in good English, put them into a sensible order, and use the correct scientific words. So when we're thinking about this, we're thinking about good English, so we're not using bullet points, sensible order, and correct scientific words. So in our answer, we need to make sure that we have got keywords in this that would hit marks, okay, in a sensible order. Okay, so we're talking about bacterial resistance here, and how does this happen? Well, we've got antibiotics which have for a long time killed bacteria. Okay, so here's a bacteria, it's got a cell wall, it's got a circular DNA, and antibiotics have killed it. Now, that is because bacteria reproduce by binary fission, which is a bit like mitosis. Every bacteria is genetically identical. So 1 goes to 2, and they're genetically identical. And then 2 goes to 4, and they're genetically identical. Now, every so often, by the process of mutation, there will be a change in the DNA of this bacteria. So if we're going to go through this in our, we know that DNA is made of ATGCs. So imagine if we had ATT, and this was the gene sequence of bases in the bacterial DNA. And let's say that there was, for argument's sake, it doesn't happen exactly like this, but let's say that this A at the top here mutated into a T. This gives a slightly different set of amino acids, which goes to a slightly different set of proteins, and this may lead to a different phenotype. Remember, that's the characteristic expressed. Okay, just a little bit of revision. We can recall that protein synthesis is, an amino acid is 3. Okay, so there we would have 3 amino acids in that sequence, and then we would have 1 base left over. So this is the process of protein synthesis, and a mutation, which is this A turning into T, which we said, could produce a different amino acid, a different protein, and therefore a different phenotype. And that different phenotype, remembering our evolution, is capable of being advantageous, and if it's advantageous, it will lead to survival, and if it leads to survival, it can reproduce where others don't, and then the population will increase with that particular phenotype. So that's our overall evolution reminder. And so now, if we think about all of that information, we can put this into an answer. And let's specifically look at that question again and see exactly what it says. Doctors give antibiotics to patients to kill bacteria in their bodies. Explain how the overuse of antibiotics has led to the evolution of resistance. So we've actually got loads to say here for 3 marks. Okay, so 1, there's going to be a mutation in the bacterial DNA, which is going to give the advantageous phenotype of being resistant to the antibiotic. 3, the resistant bacteria will survive and reproduce. 4, the offspring will have resistant allele. And 5, over time, those bacteria not resistant will die. Those who are will survive. Goes to increased population resistance. Okay, now that is the whole process, and you've absolutely nailed this question if you have put all that down. Okay, knowing my stuff, that's taken me a couple of minutes to put down. okay? And let's look at the mark scheme and just see what they've said and see if we can find anything which helps us really cement what we need to say. So a mutation occurs in bacteria, or a change in the DNA, in the gene, when the antibiotic is used. Only resistant bacteria survive, or non-resistant bacteria are killed. Yeah, we got that in. Or reference to natural selection. So that's interesting. So we could put in brackets here, just something they've, natural selection. Okay, we describe it, we've still got the mark, but we know that the board are interested in us using that term, so that's good to know. Okay. Resistant bacteria pass on the gene allele. Okay. Allow pass on the mutation. Do not accept just pass on resistance. Okay. So you can see here I've used the term pass on the resistant allele. Okay. Or the offspring will have resistant allele. Okay. And then I've talked about an increase over time in the population of the resistant bacteria. Okay. So you can see in that question, we started off with talking about the whole process in our mind of a mutation in DNA, which causes a change in the DNA sequence, which might produce a different phenotype. And now we've just gone a bit into less detail than that in our minds and just given the sequence of events that's relevant here. Okay. Right, question 4. Sex cells are produced by meiosis. Describe what happens to the chromosomes when a cell divides by meiosis. Well, this is straight knowledge, okay, and hopefully you should know that we are going from one cell, which is going to divide twice and produce 4 daughter cells, okay, and each of the daughter cells is going to have half the genetic material of the first, okay. So if this was a human cell, we'd start off with 46 chromosomes, okay, and we're going to end up with 23, 23, 23, 23. Now, in order for that to happen, if you add up this bottom row, we've got 23, 23, 23, 23, which is 92 chromosomes. So we end up with 92 chromosomes. So actually, of course, one of the things that has to happen right at the beginning is we have to double the DNA. Okay, just to let you know, we don't get 92 chromosomes in this top one because the chromosomes are still connected. We still have 46 chromosomes, but we have double the DNA. So number 1, we double the DNA. Okay, we copy the chromosomes. Okay, and then the cell divides twice, division 1. Okay, and then division 2. And then each of our 4 daughter cells is genetically varied and has half the number of chromosomes of the original one. Now I've used humans here as an example with 46, but of course if they gave you the mitosis that happened in a dog, and a dog has 56 chromosomes, then it would obviously just be exactly the same ratio, half the chromosomes in the 4 gametes produced. Okay, so mark scheme here, we can see the sequence, and this is for 2 marks, copies of chromosomes made, cell divides twice, each gamete now has a single set of chromosomes, allow chromosome number halved, cells haploid. So that is a nice word actually. Half the chromosome content is called haploid, and the full chromosome complement is called diploid. They're 2 good words to know. Okay. Darwin's theory of natural selection depends on the fact that individual organisms within a species may show a wide range of variation. Explain how meiosis and sexual reproduction give rise to variation for 2 marks. Well, this is very similar actually to the earlier question, okay? And so let's look at the mark scheme here and just check that we are familiar. So fertilization is the fusion of gametes. Fusion keyword of gametes, okay, and meiosis produces 4 genetically varied gamete cells. Okay? So if two gametes fuse, you are going to get a brand new genetic arrangement. Okay? Looking at the mark scheme, sex cells gametes fuse, offspring receive genes or chromosomes or alleles from both parents of DNA, so the fusion of gametes, okay, from both parents, and alleles in a pair may vary. So because you get one randomly from for our argument's sake, let's imagine that it's a animal, one from father, one randomly from mother, you'll have two chromosomes lining up against each other randomly, and therefore you'll get two varied alleles. Okay. C. Mutation may also give rise to variation. What is meant by mutation? This is a straight fact. So it's a change in the DNA or chromosome or gene. You can see on the right hand side here. They've got a new form of a gene, allow change in genetic material, DNA, chromosome, gene. Okay. All mutations are harmful. Explain the reason. Are all mutations harmful? Explain the reason for your answer. Well, the answer is no. And the reason for this is, one, some can make no difference. Okay, and on the right hand side here, we can see that the word they use is neutral. So they are neither good nor bad. And this goes back to, if we just remember we were talking about a mutation in DNA. If we've got our A, T, G, C, C, T, A, G. If we did, in the last example, we changed the A for a T. If we did change the A for a T here, and that particular amino acid either was coded for the same amino acid or didn't actually affect the structure of the protein, then that mutation there, the change in DNA, wouldn't lead to any difference. Okay? It could, though, it could actually not code for the right amino acid, which would affect the shape of the protein or stop the protein forming altogether, which would be a disadvantage. So some are harmful, but it's possible that change in DNA wouldn't actually create a difference. Okay? And the other thing is, some can be beneficial. And we know this because we know it's the beginning of the natural selection process. So it can be advantageous, whether that's or beneficial. Okay? And here we've got, in the mark scheme, you can see some increased chances of survival. And so linking that in with an example as well would be good. So can be advantageous, goes to increased chance of survival, e.g. bacteria resistance. Okay, and I like the fact that the board on the right hand side have given us a mark if we choose to give an example. Okay, so if you know an example in an exam question, this is the type of thing that the board are telling you, get it in and you could get a mark. So that's questions 1 to 4 on our October half-term work.